A son, desperate to carve out a life beyond his father's shadow. A wife, carrying the weight of her unborn child and her own haunting secrets. And a man, a judge no less, whose decisions in life and in the courtroom held the power to change fates. But even the most ironclad authority cannot hide the decay beneath its surface. This is the story of Judge Charles Redmond, a man admired for his towering intellect and unshakable morality, or so it seemed. But what happens when a man meant to uphold justice becomes its greatest betrayer? When he steps beyond the boundaries of decency, not just to take what isn't his, but to destroy lives in the process. And what could possibly drive a man to cover up a brutal murder that shatters his own family? A secret affair with his son's pregnant wife, a devastating HIV diagnosis, and a murder so calculated, so cold, it leaves us asking one terrifying question: how far can power go before it consumes everything in its path? This is not just a story about crime. It's a story about betrayal, the fragility of trust, and the price of silence. Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Stories like these deserve to be told, not just to uncover the truth, but to remind us all of the dangers lurking behind even the most respectable faces. Let's begin. To truly understand how this nightmare unfolded, we must first meet the players in this twisted tragedy. It all begins with the Redmond family. Charles Redmond was no ordinary judge. He was a man of prominence, hailed in Alabama's legal circles as a beacon of integrity and unyielding discipline. His courtroom reputation was built on his meticulous attention to detail and an almost unnerving ability to command respect. To many, he was the embodiment of justice, calm, calculated, and always in control. But behind the black robes and polished facade lay a man consumed by an obsessive need for power and control. In the courtroom, his command brought order. At home, it bred fear and resentment. Charles demanded perfection, not just of himself, but of everyone around him. His wife had learned to stay silent, his colleagues whispered about his domineering nature, and his son bore the brunt of his insatiable need to dominate. For Charles, every aspect of his life was a reflection of his reputation. Mistakes, weaknesses, even the smallest blemishes were intolerable. He had perfected the art of manipulation, bending others to his will with charm and intimidation in equal measure. But what happens when a man accustomed to absolute control begins to lose it? When his desires, once hidden in shadows, come to light? It's here that the cracks in Charles's world begin to show. Nathan Redmond grew up in the imposing shadow of his father. While Charles thrived on discipline, Nathan recoiled from it, yearning for a life of his own choosing. Unlike his father, Nathan wasn't drawn to power or authority. Instead, he found solace in technology, spending hours dismantling computers and writing code while his father scoffed at his wasted potential. The tension between father and son was palpable. Charles saw Nathan's choices as a rebellion against the family legacy, while Nathan saw his father's expectations as a straitjacket he had to escape. By his mid-20s, Nathan had carved out a life in tech, far removed from Charles's world of legal battles and public scrutiny. But no matter how far he went, the resentment between them lingered like a storm waiting to break. When Nathan married Rachel, he believed he'd finally found the partner who understood him. Together, they dreamed of a future untouched by Charles's control. But as Nathan would soon learn, escaping the influence of a man like Charles was easier said than done. Rachel Redmond's journey into the Redmond family was as unexpected as it was life-changing. She came from a modest background, a far cry from the wealth and influence of the Redmonds. As a child, Rachel dreamed of dancing on Broadway stages, but a knee injury in her early 20s abruptly ended her aspirations. What followed was a period of uncertainty, odd jobs, fleeting relationships, and a search for meaning in a life that had lost its rhythm. Meeting Nathan changed everything. He offered stability, a calm counterpoint to the chaos Rachel had grown up with. They married quickly, drawn together by a shared desire to build something steady and strong. When Rachel became pregnant, it seemed like the start of a new chapter, one filled with promise. But life as part of the Redmond family was far from the sanctuary Rachel had imagined. From the moment she stepped into their world, Rachel felt the weight of Charles's scrutiny. To him, she was an outsider, someone to mold, to control, or to discard if she failed to fit his image of perfection. Despite Nathan's efforts to shield her, Rachel found herself increasingly isolated, caught between her husband's quiet resentment and her father-in-law's domineering presence. This fragile balance between father, son, and daughter-in-law could only hold for so long, and as secrets began to fester beneath the surface, it wasn't a matter of if things would explode, but when. By the time Rachel was 6 months into her pregnancy, the excitement of starting a family had given way to a crushing sense of isolation. Nathan's demanding work schedule in tech often kept him at the office late into the night, leaving Rachel to navigate the long, empty hours of the day alone. The spacious Redmond home, once a symbol of their dreams, now felt cold and lifeless. Family dinners at the Redmond residence provided little solace. Nathan, seated at the far end of the table, was often engrossed in his phone or work conversations, while Charles held court with his booming voice and sharp wit. It was during these meals that Charles, always the astute observer, began to notice the small cracks in Rachel's cheerful facade. The forced laughter, the fleeting glances at the clock, the way her smile faltered when she thought no one was looking. For Charles, who thrived on control and precision, Rachel's vulnerability was a glaring opportunity. He didn't just notice her struggles, he studied them. And it wasn't long before he began to position himself as the solution. It started with words, seemingly harmless moments of encouragement and support. Charles would catch Rachel alone in the kitchen after dinner, his voice soft, almost fatherly. "You're doing such a wonderful job," he'd say, his eyes lingering just a second too long. "Nathan doesn't always show it, but I know he's proud of you." Rachel, starved for attention and validation, clung to these moments. At first, she dismissed the flutter of unease she felt around him as nothing more than hormones. But Charles's charm was disarming, his confidence magnetic. He had a way of making her feel seen in a way Nathan hadn't in months. Their conversations grew more frequent, their tone increasingly intimate. Charles began stopping by during the day, ostensibly to check on Rachel while Nathan was at work. They would sit on the couch, their knees brushing, as he listened intently to her concerns about motherhood, marriage, and the future. It was in these stolen moments that the boundary between support and seduction blurred. One evening, as a storm rolled in over the Alabama hills, Rachel found herself alone with Charles in the dimly lit living room. He poured her a glass of wine, his voice low and steady as he spoke of how overwhelming pregnancy could be. When Rachel broke down in tears, confessing her fears of being a failure as a wife and mother, Charles leaned in close, his hand resting gently on her cheek. "You're extraordinary, Rachel," he whispered. "You deserve to feel loved and appreciated." The kiss that followed felt inevitable, as though all the unspoken tension between them had been leading to that moment. Rachel's mind screamed at her to stop, but her body betrayed her, leaning into the comfort and attention she had so desperately craved. That night marked the beginning of an affair that would unravel the Redmond family and lead to consequences neither of them could foresee. For weeks, Rachel lived in a whirlwind of guilt and desire, torn between her loyalty to Nathan and the intoxicating connection she felt with Charles. But as the affair continued, she began noticing subtle changes in her health, a persistent fatigue, unexplained fevers, and a sense that something was wrong. At her next prenatal checkup, Rachel's fears were confirmed. The doctor's voice was calm but firm as he explained the results of her routine tests. She had tested positive for HIV. The room seemed to tilt as Rachel tried to process the words. The diagnosis was not just a blow to her health, but a devastating confirmation that her affair with Charles had come at an unthinkable cost. That evening, Rachel confronted Charles in a trembling voice, revealing her diagnosis. For the first time, the ever-composed judge faltered. His expression shifted from shock to panic, though he quickly recovered, pulling Rachel into a tight embrace. "We'll get through this together," he assured her, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his fear. "But no one can know. Not Nathan, not anyone. If this gets out, it will destroy us both." Rachel nodded numbly, her tears soaking into Charles's shirt. But as the weight of their secret grew heavier with each passing day, so too did the fractures in the life she had once dreamed of building. As the affair spiraled further into secrecy and deceit, Rachel's world began to crumble. But the worst was yet to come, a confrontation that would ignite a chain of events, ending in tragedy. Nathan Redmond had always prided himself on his ability to remain calm under pressure. But nothing could prepare him for the text message that arrived late one evening, a photograph so incriminating it made his blood run cold. The image showed Rachel and his father, Charles, locked in an intimate embrace, their faces unmistakable. Nathan stared at the screen, his mind racing with questions. Who had sent this? How long had this been going on? And why? Rage surged through him, eclipsing every other emotion. Without thinking, he stormed into the bedroom where Rachel was folding baby clothes, his phone gripped tightly in his hand. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling with fury as he thrust the phone in her face. Rachel's eyes widened, and for a moment she was silent, searching for words that wouldn't come. "Nathan, I can explain," she began, but he cut her off, his voice rising. "Explain what? That you've been sneaking around with my father? That you've been lying to me this entire time?" The argument escalated quickly. Nathan's anger, fueled by betrayal and humiliation, blinded him to Rachel's tearful pleas for calm. In a moment of uncontrollable rage, he lunged at her, his hands around her neck. Rachel struggled, choking out cries for him to stop, but Nathan's fury consumed him. When her body went limp in his grasp, the room fell silent. Nathan staggered back, his breathing ragged as he stared at Rachel's lifeless form on the floor. The gravity of what he had done hit him all at once, and a deep, guttural sob escaped his lips. Moments later, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted Nathan from his daze. He froze as the front door creaked open and Charles stepped inside, calling out casually. When Charles entered the room and saw Rachel's motionless body, his face contorted in shock. "What happened?" Charles demanded, his voice sharp and commanding. Nathan stammered, trying to explain through tears, but his words were incoherent. Finally, he choked out, "It was an accident! I didn't mean to!" Charles's mind raced as he took in the scene. He knew this wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a scandal that could destroy his career, his reputation, and the legacy he had built. But instead of expressing grief or remorse, Charles's tone shifted. He leaned in close to Nathan, his voice low and calculated. "Listen to me, Nathan. We can fix this, but you have to do exactly as I say." The father and son worked quickly, their movements frantic yet methodical. Charles wrapped Rachel's body in a blanket from the couch, instructing Nathan to grab a shovel from the garage. Together, they loaded her into Charles's black SUV and drove into the night. The drive was suffocatingly silent, the weight of their actions pressing down on them like a physical force. The remote location Charles chose was far from prying eyes, a dense forest an hour outside the city. Under the dim glow of the SUV's headlights, they dug a shallow grave, their hands trembling with every scoop of dirt. "This has to look like a robbery," Charles muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. He placed Rachel's phone and a few personal items nearby, arranging them to suggest a violent altercation. Before leaving, he wiped the SUV's interior meticulously, ensuring no trace of evidence remained. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds the rhythmic crunch of shovels against dirt and the distant rustle of leaves. Nathan's hands bled from gripping the shovel too tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Charles, ever composed, worked with precision, his face a mask of stoicism. But beneath the surface, both men were unraveling. As they drove back to the Redmond home, the enormity of their crime hung in the air between them. Charles instructed Nathan to report Rachel missing in a few days, confident that his influence would protect them from scrutiny. But what they didn't know was that the trail of lies they had woven would soon begin to unravel. 3 days after Rachel's death, Nathan Redmond sat in a dimly lit police station, his face pale and hands trembling. With a rehearsed calmness, he reported his pregnant wife missing, recounting the last time he'd seen her. He told officers she had gone out for a walk one evening, dressed in her favorite maternity clothes, and never returned. The news of Rachel's disappearance sent shockwaves through the small Alabama community. Her friends and neighbors, who knew her as a kind-hearted woman eager to become a mother, organized search parties, plastered her photos across social media, and begged for any leads. Nathan appeared at these gatherings, his demeanor somber and distraught. But some noticed his avoidance of eye contact and the way his voice cracked under questioning. Meanwhile, Charles Redmond leveraged his influence, urging the community to respect the family's privacy during this difficult time. He made subtle but pointed efforts to direct the narrative away from any suspicion of foul play, insisting that Rachel's disappearance was likely the result of a tragic accident. Months passed, and the hope of finding Rachel alive began to fade. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, 2 hikers stumbled upon a shallow grave in a secluded area of the Talladega National Forest. The stench of decomposition led them to the grim discovery: Rachel's partially buried remains. The hikers immediately called authorities, and within hours the site was swarming with forensic teams. The condition of Rachel's body, though degraded by time, showed clear signs of foul play. Bruises around her neck suggested strangulation, and the hastily dug grave raised questions about who could have committed such a brutal act. News of the discovery reignited public outrage and heartbreak. Rachel's family, who had held on to hope despite the odds, were devastated by the confirmation of her death. Vigils were held in her honor, the once bright hope for her and her unborn child now extinguished. With Rachel's remains found, the case transitioned from a missing persons search to a homicide investigation. Detectives began piecing together the timeline leading up to her disappearance, focusing their attention on Nathan and his increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks following her death. Nathan's alibi quickly unraveled under scrutiny. His timeline of events didn't match witness testimonies, and investigators noted his vague, evasive answers during questioning. Meanwhile, Charles Redmond's attempts to deflect attention only raised suspicions further. It was a surveillance camera from a nearby gas station that dealt the first major blow. A recording showed Charles's SUV heading toward the forest the night Rachel disappeared. Additional evidence began to mount: a receipt for a shovel and work gloves purchased at a hardware store on the same night Rachel vanished, and tire tracks near the grave matching Charles's vehicle. Forensic experts matched Rachel's DNA to fibers found in the SUV's trunk, sealing their suspicions. Detectives, sensing the walls closing in, strategized carefully. They knew cracking a case involving such a powerful figure required precision. It wasn't just about the evidence. It was about unraveling the lies that had been woven to protect a legacy. As investigators honed in on their prime suspects, the Redmond family facade began to crumble. The truth that emerged from the shadows would shock even the most hardened detectives and leave the entire community reeling. On a humid August morning, Nathan Redmond sat across from detectives in an interrogation room. Weeks of mounting evidence and relentless questioning had worn him down. His face was pale, his hands trembling. The carefully crafted facade he and his father had built was cracking under the weight of his guilt. "I didn't mean to," Nathan began, his voice barely audible. The detectives leaned in, sensing a breakthrough. "It happened so fast. She told me about the affair, about him. I just..." His words dissolved into sobs. Nathan confessed to the argument that turned deadly, detailing the moment he realized Rachel was gone. But it was what he revealed next that truly shocked investigators. He described how his father, Judge Charles Redmond, had arrived moments later, coldly assessing the scene. Charles had not only helped cover up the crime, but had orchestrated every step to protect his own reputation. "He told me what to do," Nathan admitted, his voice trembling. "He said we had to make it look like someone else did it. He said no one could know." Nathan's confession painted a chilling picture of manipulation, control, and a father's desperate attempt to bury a devastating secret. Charles Redmond's arrest sent shockwaves through Alabama's legal and political circles. The image of the once revered judge, handcuffed and escorted from his grand estate, was splashed across every major news outlet. For decades, Charles had presided over cases with an iron fist, delivering verdicts that shaped lives. Now, he was the one on trial. The courtroom was packed as the prosecution laid bare the sordid details of Charles's double life. Witness testimonies, surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and Nathan's confession painted a damning portrait of a man who had used his power and influence to manipulate everyone around him. The revelation of his affair with Rachel, his son's pregnant wife, shocked even the most jaded observers. But it was the revelation of Rachel's HIV diagnosis that left the courtroom in stunned silence. Medical records revealed that Charles had knowingly infected her. Prosecutors argued that his desperate attempts to cover up the affair were as much about concealing his medical condition as they were about protecting his reputation. Public outrage reached a fever pitch. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, demanding justice not only for Rachel, but also for the unborn child whose life was cut short. Charles's fall from grace was complete, his legacy forever tarnished. Nathan was sentenced to life in prison for Rachel's murder. Charles received a lengthy sentence for his role in the cover-up, obstruction of justice, and his part in the tragic series of events that unfolded. The once proud Redmond name was now synonymous with scandal, betrayal, and unimaginable loss. As the dust settled, the story of Judge Charles Redmond and his family became a cautionary tale, one that still lingers in the minds of those who followed it. But what lessons, if any, can be drawn from this tragedy? Let's reflect. Betrayal, power, secrets. These are the forces that tore the Redmond family apart. The story of Judge Charles Redmond is more than just a tale of personal failings. It's a reminder of the devastating consequences that unchecked power and deception can unleash. At its heart, this tragedy asks us to examine the fragile bonds that hold families together. How much do we truly know about the people we trust the most? What happens when the pursuit of power blinds us to the lives we destroy along the way? For Rachel, a young woman who sought love, stability, and a brighter future for her child, the cost of those secrets was her life. For Nathan, a son desperate for his father's approval, the cost was his freedom. And for Charles, who sought to control everyone around him, the cost was everything: his career, his reputation, and the family he claimed to protect. But beyond the personal cost lies a deeper question for all of us. Can justice ever truly heal wounds this deep? Or do the scars left behind serve as a reminder of how fragile justice and family can be? What do you think? Can betrayal like this ever be forgiven? How would you have handled the revelations that Nathan faced? And what lessons can we draw from this tragedy to apply in our own lives? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective on this complex and haunting story. If this story moved you, make sure to like this video and share it with someone who might find it just as compelling. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the most shocking and thought-provoking stories out there. Hit that bell icon so you'll never miss an update. The Redmond case stands as a haunting reminder of the cost of silence and secrets. In a family where appearances were everything, the truth was left to fester until it destroyed them all. It's a lesson that the price of covering up lies is often far greater than the cost of confronting them. Justice was served, but the wounds left behind remind us of how fragile our bonds can be, and how quickly trust can crumble under the weight of deception. As we close this chapter, let us not forget the lives lost, the pain endured, and the ripple effects that will haunt those involved for generations. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and remember, the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth seeking.